My name's Nate. I run Jesus People SF. Today I want to talk about just money, why the Bible commends Christians using money and even storing up money, and whether there is a better money. And I want to commend that the better money is indeed Bitcoin. So here we have Ecclesiastes. This is chapter 10. And Solomon, speaking by the Spirit, says, money answers all things. Money answers all things. So, do you think this changes in the new covenant? Do you think God stopped thinking that money answers all things? Or my interpretation of Solomon here is answers all things. It's a tool. It's a tool to get things done. And the New Testament commends money as a tool to use for good. So given that money is a tool for doing good, what parameters does the Bible put on using money? Well, here's one. Deuteronomy 25, verse 15. It says, "You shall have a full and just weight. You shall have a full and just measure, that your days may be prolonged in the land which Yahweh your God gives you." So you see, using money justly affects our lifespan. Now, I know this is a covenant promise for Israel, particularly in their land. So you might want to say that's out of context, but I think this is a principle that when you use what God gives you faithfully, God blesses you, potentially with life or some other blessing. But in this instance, God is speaking specifically to people who buy and sell, and he's saying, in those days when you would buy and sell, you'd use like a way of weighing out the money and then the some kind of standard weight. And so you'd want to use a just weight. You don't want to mess with the weight so that you get more money for less product. Now, we've established here that God wants you to use just money. What's unjust money? Well, here we have $26.14 when the Federal Reserve was established in 1913. Today, that same $26.14 would be worth $1, or at least in 2020, when this chart was created. Let me show you another chart to see what's going on here. And here we have something called the M2 money supply. Now, this is from the Federal Reserve's website. Sorry, they don't have it sized here. But here you have, they started recording the M2 around the 1960s, and this goes up to the present day. What do you see? This is a money supply chart. Now, the definition of the M2 money supply is the Federal Reserve's estimate of the total money supply, including all cash people have on hand, plus the money deposited in checking accounts and savings accounts. So, this you see is a money printer chart. This is the Fed no longer even having to actually print dollar bills. They can just throw some zeros onto a computer screen, and our purchasing power, as this goes up, this is our purchasing power here going down. And you see that some money, without you doing anything, withers away. And this is basically how the Federal Reserve works. They want inflation. And this helps the U.S. government pay for huge deficits when they spend, because they get to be the first people to use freshly printed dollars. But what happens is that trickles down to you. And so it becomes a hidden tax, specifically on the poor. So what's the solution if some money, such as the US dollar specifically, but fiat in general, that's money not backed by anything, not backed by gold, not backed by anything except the clout of a particular country like the US dollar is? What's the solution for Christians? Well, first, let's figure out, what does the Bible actually want for Christians with regard to money? So here is 2 Thessalonians 3, verse 10. Actually, let's start in verse 8. Here Paul says, "We did not eat anyone's bread without paying for it." So Paul was willing to use money. And he says, but with toil and labor we worked night and day. And here he says in verse 10, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. So just a couple of principles. Paul isn't saying if you don't have a job, you're somehow lesser than. This is about people unwilling to work and provide their own way, right? So first principle here, God commends labor, and he commends you being able to pay for your own food, right? That's what this means here. Not eating, that's not eating somebody else's food unless you're willing to do a hard day's labor if you have it, if you have the ability to work. Not if you're disabled. Obviously, there's contingencies that can come in. But if you have the labor at hand, you're willing to work, you need to work to be able to have food, etc. All right, here's a second principle of the New Testament. Here Paul is talking to the Corinthian church, and he's encouraging them to collect in order to help some poor saints in Jerusalem. He says, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so do you also. Now, in order to collect money for poor saints that are in need, you need to have stored up. Am I right? So there's a couple of principles that are arising from the text we're looking at here in the New Testament. One, you need to have enough for yourself so you can eat and clothe yourself and potentially have shelter and things like that. And then you also need to be able to be generous. You need to have something to give something. Now, here's just a couple of other texts. Here, Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 12, he says, so that you will behave properly toward outsiders and not be in any need. And he says, work with your own hands in the prior verse. So part of work is to be able to provide for yourself, and the Bible doesn't want you insofar as you can help it. Not if you can't find work, that's not what it's talking about. But if you can work, it wants you to provide for your needs. It wants you to pay for the things you need yourself and not depend on others if you can help it. All right. So I think we've established a few things about what the New Testament expects from you. One, expects you to pay for yourself and your own bills, then expects you to help others. And just a final verse here. Here's James chapter 2. James has a lot to say about rich people, but I think it's mostly unjust uses of riches and stuff. So here he says, if a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed, and be filled, and yet you do not give them what is necessary for the body, what use is that? He says your faith in that instance is dead. But here's the deal. If you don't have money, if you don't have resources to share, how does James require you to do a good work by giving, right? So that implies even James, who rebukes people who, quote, store up in the last days, he expects them to have enough to be able to share, insofar as it depends on them. Obviously, poverty happens to a lot of people, even happened to Paul. But insofar as you can help it, you need to store up enough to be able to take care of yourself and take care of others. All right, so what does this have to do with Bitcoin specifically? Essentially, my argument is that the US dollar and fiat, if you just work, earn a wage, and throw it into a savings account, the value of that money goes down. And it's by design. Your government, the US government, if you're American, and most likely whatever other country you're in, if you're in another country, simply has a currency wherein the central bank is permitted to print without any kind of backing. You can't exchange that currency for a set value of a hard asset like gold or something. That's no longer the case for pretty much everybody. So here's why Bitcoin is a better and more just standard of monetary value. It's because there's a scarce amount of Bitcoin. In fact, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. Now, that might seem like a lot, but how many people are on the earth? There are approximately 8 some odd billion people on the earth. So 21 million for 8 billion is a lot of scarcity. And even if every millionaire wanted to have one Bitcoin, which they can afford right now if they wanted, they can't all have one because there's just too many millionaires to be able to have one whole Bitcoin. So essentially what I'm commending, since the Bible commands Christians to have enough for themselves and to have something stored up to be able to help someone in need. A better storehouse for whatever little you think is faithful and appropriate before the Lord to store up. A better storehouse than a savings account, and at least so far in Bitcoin's lifespan, an even better storehouse than property and historically very sound assets that hold their value and increase in value. Bitcoin is a better one. And because it's scarce, because it holds its value over time and even increases exponentially in value over time, it's a better store for Christians for their monetary needs that, by the way, we would say that God himself requires of Christians within reason. So Bitcoin will not be printed into oblivion like you see here, this M2 money supply chart. The purchasing power of Bitcoin is not like the US dollar here, withering away with each passing year and each quarter of the Federal Reserve's existence. If you want to fulfill your monetary calling before the Lord, which is to take care of yourself and others, and by the way, can you feel the grocery bills? Can you feel the expenses of rent? Can you feel all these pressures increasing? Whatever you would normally put in a savings account, maybe you put a portion of that instead into Bitcoin. And I think you will be better prepared to provide for your own needs and the needs of those who might come to you and need. The Bible would commend that you help. That's why I say that Bitcoin is just money, whereas fiat by design is intended to wither away your purchasing power as you hold it. And just about everybody at this point can see that that's the case. My name's Nate. I run Jesus People SF. Please hit the like and subscribe button if this video was informative, helpful, encouraging. If you have any pushback or anything like that, feel free to leave that in the comments. I'm not the Bitcoin guru on YouTube, so I'll point you to some better resources than myself for what is Bitcoin, why is it a secure technology, why is it a good monetary asset, all that stuff. I'll try and leave that in the description of this video. Have a great day. Bye.